Welcome to the Losses Become Gains podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and this is a very special episode today because I got my husband with me. I roped him into it. We're going to spill all the tea today. And this really is just meant to be a very open and candid conversation, and that's exactly what it's going to be. Prepped him a little bit, but I don't know what's going to come out of his mouth, so
Me neither.
It terrifies me. But we've been through a lot in our relationship. We've been together. Well, actually, at the time of this recording, we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of our wedding.
That's right.
Yeah. So, we've lived in a different country for a short period of time in those 6 years. No, 5 years.
You sure?
I don't know. No,
Oh boy.
I honestly can't. Anyway, been together a minute. We've been through a lot. We've seen a lot. And my parents' deaths were a really big part of that. And for those who don't know, and I don't want to make this the complete focus of this conversation, but it did affect our relationship a lot to the point where we did break up for, it was like talk about this, but I think a few months. It was like at least a few months. And, just how my grief and everything I was going through and subsequently what he was going through, really affected our relationship, but it also affected how we got back together. So that's ultimately what we'll be talking about today. And I also want to preface this by saying that I think what's interesting about our relationship, what I find interesting, and I think what a lot of other people find interesting is that, here I am 32 without either parent, and he thankfully has two very happy, he's got them both. He's got two very happy, healthy parents still, thank God, knock on wood, or plexiglass, whatever this table is. And, it's just a very interesting dynamic, I think. But really my want for bringing him on today is to get into just his perspective, because I think there's so many relationships out here like this where, one person is going through a difficult loss, whether it be a parent or whoever it is. And the partner maybe doesn't know what to do or how to react, or, they're struggling too, but they don't want to be a burden to the partner who's going through a major loss and, all the things in between. So I really thought it was super valuable to bring him on, get his perspective. And if any of this applies to you or will at some point, I think it'll be a really eye-opening conversation. So without further ado, by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome to our living room. We're sitting on a couch that my mom picked out. We are currently living in the condo that was my parents', and that's a whole separate conversation. But you got some of our wedding photos behind us just to set the scene. And yeah, just wanted to kind of bring you guys in and get comfy with you today. So that being said, the interrogation begins. No, so really I just wanted to kick this off because a lot of you might not know my husband. I don't, it's not that I never post about you, but I
exist.
He exists. And I want you guys to get to know him, but you always hear me talk, so I want to let him talk. So do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about you and who you are?
Yeah.
Where you come from?
So I'm John Accardo. She took my name, thankfully.
Yep.
I'm Italian from Napa.
That's we joke, by the way. This is why I took his last name, and it's the only reason I married him is because he's Italian.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm working on that citizenship.
Almost
baby.
Positive that's the only reason that you married me. So born and raised in Napa, third generation, Napa Valley. We live in Sonoma now.
Mm-hmm.
Went to college in Texas. That was a whole thing. Graduated, drove home immediately. And we're, like she said, we've been together for 6 years or so. I'm a sommelier. I'm in the wine business. So being from Napa, you would, imagine that you might get into the wine industry.
A lot of us in this industry.
I didn't really mean to get into it. Kind of got into it after college. Drank a lot of beer in college, and then after got into wine.
As one does.
And really enjoy the wine business. And so eating, drinking, traveling is 3 of my passions. I'm sure lots of folks can relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are three of the best,
I think
honestly.
we bonded over that. We really
Yeah.
did. That is like one of the main things I would say that brought us together
Yeah.
is just that commonality. And it's part of like what took us to Italy. And like, well, our first date is a whole nother story, but anyway, continue.
And I work for a winery in Sonoma currently. I've worked for a few wineries. Like she said, we lived in Italy for a while I was working for a winery there. And then I've worked for two in Napa and two wineries in Sonoma, including the one I'm at now. I've been there for about 4 years. But yeah, that's me.
So one of the other things
Scorpio.
that, oh yeah, an Aquarius, which apparently doesn't
I
mix.
don't know what they mean, but
Yeah, I'm not honestly. I wish I was more versed in what that means. I'm more versed on mine than I am on yours.
you're the
But
horse.
I'm a
I'm
horse.
a horse. You're year
Oh,
of
are you thinking
the
Chinese zodiac?
yes.
I'm like
You're
a I'm
year
like
of
a
the ram.
am I a ram? I thought I
Yeah,
was a
you're the
sheep.
ram.
Anyway,
Hard headed.
I don't. I wish I could say that wasn't true. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's always a debate on who wears the pants in this relationship. But anyway,
We'll edit that out.
no, we won't. I also wanted him to give you a little bit of background, and you can do like an abbreviated version of this, but how we met and the just I don't know, just to kind of give you guys some more context, set the scene on just us. But
How we met?
yeah, just a summarized version.
I was working for a winery called Inglenook in Rutherford in Napa Valley. She started working there as well, and she started working
Very late
in
December of
yes
2017.
in reservations, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we met through working together at the winery. It was I saw her. I remember Gemma. You remember Gemma?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Gemma. She was the manager at the time, and she was walking you around, introducing you to everyone. Like, this
Uh-huh.
is Tara, the new reservationist. Yada yada yada.
Have I heard this story?
I think you lived it. And I remember being introduced to you, and Gemma said, "This is Tara, our new reservationist." And I saw you, and I was like, "Ah,
That's amazing.
finally someone."
No, I haven't heard this take on it.
uh,
That's amazing. Oh my
and
god, I
so
love this podcast.
after that, life
Rest is
found a way.
history. Well, what's so funny, okay, so and if any of our family members are listening to this, the joke of the family is that I said no to and mind you, the longer we've been together, the more the story continues to get fabricated
No.
as far as how many times I said no to him. It was like 2.5. Okay. So again, for context, and I'll keep this short because I want to get into the meat of this episode, but I had just gotten back from living in Italy for 6 months as well. So when we say we have this affinity for Italy, like we're not joking, but I was there, I was teaching English to the Italian military, and that's a whole nother story. Anyway, so the reason I came back and got this job was I wanted to go back to Italy. Like that was my plan. My plan was to make some money and go back hopefully like later that year. Which by the way never would have been possible. I was way too broke. But anyway, in knowing that, and I was also a little bit jaded from something that had just happened to me with some guy anyway, and so I was like I was really just not interested. And I can't remember the first time that you asked me out, but was I was hesitant. And mind you, because I wanted to leave, because that was the plan, I didn't know him. I didn't know if he was going to go tell people at work. Like, I didn't know if you were, you could have told a manager for all I knew. So I just, you know, I was a little sussed out by that. But it didn't take long. I mean, from when I started, which was very late December, like it may as well have been like early January, to our first date, which I remember was February 28th, a couple months for him to wear me down.
Moral of the story. I asked her out at least twice, and she said no at least twice. So
okay, that we can agree.
Known.
We can we can agree. But here we are, happily married
So
now.
happily married.
We're so happy. Needless to say, everything that I have been through in the last 3.5 years has very much, I mean, where do I even start? Changed my entire perspective on life. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it just completely changed my life, really. And when I think back on our relationship and how it's affected us and the way that we communicate and or didn't communicate really at one point, um, really the long and short of it for those who maybe don't know the full story or only know part of it or kind of the backstory of who I've lost, what I've lost. My mom was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in, I think, around May of 2019. From diagnosis to passing, it was probably 7 or 8 months. She died on December 9th, 2019. Throughout that time, my dad had prostate cancer. He was 5 years into that journey, if not more, going on 6 years. And once my mom died, shortly thereafter, dad followed suit. he His cancer spread. It metastasized from his prostate to his lower back and to his brain, and he died roughly 6 months later, so July 13th of 2020. So that was a crazy time, just with COVID, with being able to see him and not see him, and it was just, it was a complete nightmare for myself, for many people during that time. I was very fortunate in that I could see him. They got me in to see him in certain ways, but I know other people out there are not as lucky. So if that is you today, I'm thinking of you truly. And in the midst of all of this, we are living together. We're, for all intents and purposes, having a happy-ish relationship. and but I could feel, and this is okay. So here we're getting into the crux of the conversation. So I don't know. I could feel things shifting. I could feel things changing, not just in our relationship, frankly, but in my life and with work. Work was harder to concentrate on. Mind you, as my mom progressed and got worse. So this was like, September into October, definitely into November. She at one point was in the hospital and just did not come out. I mean, she was in there for, I don't know, probably like a month and a half or two.
Long time.
There was a point, I don't know when you stopped seeing her, but he did not see her once. The last, I mean, probably not since, and mind you, she also had to get a tracheotomy during her journey with cancer. So there came a point where that happened. She was at UCSF, which, by the way, so much kudos to that hospital. They're literally like angels. Yeah, I don't think you saw her. Did you see my dad again?
Nope.
Either after that? Yeah. So just to put this into perspective of how, oh my gosh, how do I even word this? How bad things were. Um, but I don't know. My family is a little more private, I guess I would say, than yours too.
Yeah.
And so just with the very like with the nature of my mom's tracheotomy and I think just her whole cancer journey, like I don't know. I just it never
Something
felt
you,
appropriate
yeah,
to like bring him over. Like I can't
something you
explain.
don't want. If it was me in her place, like I wouldn't want people seeing me like that.
Yeah, yeah, which
It just
is
felt like very
so sad to think
invasive,
about. Yeah,
which
yeah,
sucks that I never got to, see her. I don't even know the last time I spoke to her. It was a
that's crazy.
while before that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd
that's
have to
really
think. I'd
wild.
have to think hard about
Well,
that. Yeah.
earlier in that year, I should mention that in March, so just a couple months before she was diagnosed, she was losing weight. She was having more issues with swallowing and eventually breathing. Um, yeah, but we did go to my cousin's wedding in March of that year. So that was like, I mean, thank God we had that sort of like bonding experience and he got to know my parents, I don't know, a little bit more that weekend at least. I know you and my dad like went out to breakfast and stuff
Yeah.
and I'm so happy he had that. But of course, I wish we had years more together, It's like, yeah, that's hard to wrap my head around for sure. But um yeah, so we just kind of like never saw them again. But Here's where I want to start asking you some questions. So I'm curious too. I don't know. I felt that my mom's decline versus my dad's decline, they were really like same but different in some ways. But I want to know, because this episode is from your perspective, how did you feel when anything you want to share when mom was diagnosed, that going south, for lack of a better term, um, as she to continue to progress and get worse? Like, how did you feel? What did you notice in our relationship? How did that all progress for you?
Well, when your mom got diagnosed, like when we figured out like this is the cause of this,
Hmm.
it was very surreal.
Yeah,
I'm sure you can,
it's a good word for it.
yeah, you could relate to that. Very almost like dreamlike.
Yeah.
And it's not something you expect to hear that someone say to you, "Oh, you have cancer," or "Oh, your loved one has cancer."
Hmm.
And especially the type of cancer too, when they
Yeah.
say you have esophageal cancer and you're like, I haven't smoked a cigarette my entire life. It's just very
It just like didn't feel
surprising.
right.
Yes, it felt out of place, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, so right off the bat, it was very much like surprising, and I didn't know how to or what to think, I suppose. I guess
Yeah.
in my head, I was thinking, I'm sure it's not that bad,
Hmm.
and I'm sure it'll be fine. It's scary, but I'm sure it'll be okay.
Yeah. All of us.
I remember
All of
thinking
us thought
that.
that,
I
I
remember
think.
thinking like, "Oh,"
Because nothing could happen to Lori.
and she
Like nothing could
yeah,
happen to my mom. Like it wasn't
I remember sitting I'm like, "Yeah, okay, so she's got a little cancer. We're gonna get it
little cancer.
fixed, and it'll be alright. She'll be fine.
Yeah.
She's, you know, a healthy person, like, very healthy."
Extremely healthy, by the way. Like, not to go too deep dive into this, but like walked every day, super active. She was like a masseuse, by the way, like an esthetician masseuse. So she was constantly on her
And
feet
she was,
working
like,
with her hand.
4'11",
Oh
like,
my
she
God.
was the
Yeah. She's like
tiniest.
5 foot, just super healthy
Yeah.
with what she ate. Like it, this was not meant to happen to this woman. And I'm sure people can relate out there to that feeling where something about the diagnosis, it's just it feels so random. Now I should mention she had GERD, which I am totally blanking on the acronym. Yeah, that's the acronym, but I'm blanking on what that actually means. It's like chronic like acid reflux. Sorry if there's like any doctors here, then I'm like totally botching this, but like basically that's what it was. She dealt with acid reflux and symptoms of acid reflux for many years. So, and in learning that there's no proof that that like caused her cancer or whatever, but I do think it's interesting that having GERD for that long, and that directly affects your esophagus. I mean, we don't know, but at the time that didn't like compute for a lot of us. So
Right.
anyway,
What was
what was the question again? um,
the rest
well,
of it?
no, I mean, so that was, yeah, no, that I align with that completely. I guess, how did you feel? I don't know. Do you remember kind of how you were feeling leading up to her death? Like,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
same thing you said. I feel like I was probably naive about the whole situation as well. Like, of course, I've never had any type of or been a part of its type of situation like that
none of us had really, to be
where
honest.
it was just kind of slow
Yeah.
and gradual. And I guess when it's really slow, it's different because you can still sit there and have hope. But if it's very quick,
Yeah.
it's more like, oh, this happened
Hmm.
because it's just almost, you know, overnight.
The shock
So,
hit's different too, I feel like.
so it was just,
Yeah.
yeah, naive about the whole situation. I didn't know how to or what to think about it. I was, you know, I knew everything that you told me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. You were pretty in the dark, really, I guess, in retrospect. Now that I'm like literally sitting here thinking about this, like Yeah, and I don't even know how much I talked about it. I'm sure I did,
You talked
but
about
I'm
it a
sure
little
I
bit.
got home and was like, that's the last thing I want to think about right now. Like I
Mhm.
was just so emotionally emotionally drained is like the simplest way I could put it. Yeah, it was heavy. Christmas may as well not have been existent that year as far as I was concerned. I didn't care. I don't know. I think we celebrated. I can't even remember what we did. I think my dad and I were together for sure. Had to have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, we it was just like it was a shitty day. I mean, we just I don't know. Neither of us were in a good place. So 2020 rolls around. and
COVID.
and COVID, yeah. Hello COVID. So yeah, what? February, March, things start getting bad and that's when my dad starts going downhill too. And that I think is probably when our relationship started shifting. Which now looking back on it, I'm trying to even like pinpoint exactly
Yeah,
like
when?
what happened, to be honest with you. Or like, but this is where I know I'm doing a lot of talking, which I said I wouldn't do. But yeah, I'm trying to remember. I don't think there was like a specific point. I don't know, frankly, what exactly it was. I think from my perspective, I had not really grieved or dealt with the passing of my mom before dad started to get worse. That being said, I'm gonna take this back to you now. So COVID starts happening. I don't know. How were you feeling at that time? Did you feel a semblance of my dad's health decline? Like, what do you remember from that time?
I just remember from that whole time just overwhelming sadness
Hmm.
all the time.
From me? Or
Just,
just
I mean, just in general. It
mm,
was just like, just very sad, very, um, what's the word? Just down,
mm, yeah.
not happy,
Well, that tracks because that's
not
how I felt.
excited for life, which is totally understandable.
Yeah.
I get it. But when I look back on those times, I just immediately the feeling I get looking back on it is just it's just sad,
Hmm.
just terrible feelings.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I mean, I'm sure I mean that had an effect on me and it had an effect on you and us.
Yeah.
I had never been through I still to this day have never really been through any type of sorrow or
Hmm.
traumatic
Like
event, sad event like that.
anguish to where it like
Yes.
brings you to your knees kind of a thing.
I've still never been overwhelmingly just sad and depressed
Count yourself
over
lucky.
something in my life. So it was for me, 100% new,
Yeah.
which for a lot of folks,
I mean, it was for me too, to be
yes,
honest with you. Just because I had just lost my mom did not mean I knew how to deal with dad. Like, and it's a different person, it's a different relationship. And there were certain things where I was like, oh, well, this feels fucking familiar, in like a very twisted, dark way. Um, but there were certain parts of his illness that were new to me. Again, like I said, like the depression, the loneliness without my mom. And you hear about that. Like I feel like there are studies around this. And again, don't I'm not like a scientist here or anything, but like around people that um have a loved one die or a partner of decades. I mean, my parents had been married over 35 years at that point. He just what he speaking of not happy, he wasn't happy. I don't think he knew what to do with
mm-mm.
himself. And there's other things that I could say that I can confirm that, but I'll keep that private for now. But um yeah, but I mean, no doubt that was ultimately the place I was at too, I think. And then, how does that not affect a relationship when someone's like, you know, not in a good headspace? And so many things, and we don't have to get into this, but it's like, the intimacy dwindles and things like that, where you're just kind of like, how are we?
It's
We're
like
not even
we're just
connecting,
going through the
really.
motions of life,
Yeah, sort of.
just literally trying to get through each day as best you can, and you're really not thinking about anything.
Yeah.
You're not connecting. You're not doing anything except for waking up, staying alive, and then going to sleep. Like that was
Yeah.
basically the day to day throughout those times. And I remember it.
Yeah.
It was just
Especially when things started to get really bad with Chad, probably.
right. Yeah. So looking back, it's just sad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So there came a point where all of us really came to a head. And it's crazy. And I definitely want to do like an episode part 2 with him on this, because I think there's something to be said, which, spoiler alert, if you didn't like get it from this episode, like we ultimately broke up at some point, and we'll get into that a little bit here, but I do think it's a whole separate conversation, just, go into what both of us learned from that point. Cause I think, I know we don't like to, like, him especially doesn't like to focus on the breakup, which, like, who does, right? We're married now. It doesn't, but it's not that it doesn't matter. In fact, I think everything I had been through and everything we had been through together and these deaths ultimately, all compiled and all played a part in why and how that happened, but also how and why we reunited. And not everybody does. And that's where I have, like, I will sometimes get people who reach out or comment or whatever. And they're almost like, I hate to say it, they're curious about that, because you don't always hear about that happening.
When leading up to the breakup and us parting ways, we were both affected by the sadness and the whole situation differently, and it was affecting us in ways we weren't really privy to. Like, we didn't know how it was affecting us.
Yeah.
And so I think that played a huge part in our relationship. And I think that we are still figuring out how it actually did affect us, but we've learned a lot about how it did at this point. So looking back, you have a little bit more clarity on what was actually happening in the relationship because of the situation and what had happened with your parents and what was still happening with your dad at the
Yeah.
time. So, as I said prior, I'd never been through some type of situation like this. And so I didn't know how to handle it. I don't think I was equipped to handle it mentally or emotionally. My whole family is not, as you know, it's a really brush it under the rug and don't deal with your emotions. Kind of old fashioned that way.
I laugh out of love.
So I was brought up to not deal with emotions. And
That bode really well for
yeah,
us.
so that I'm sure had something to do with everything that transpired. So I was just not dealing with emotions, whether it be, the passing of her mom or just our relationship. I just wasn't dealing with it in a positive and just
like productive way.
in a productive way that you should. But I was unaware of that.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, I was unaware of that. And so
that went for both of us, for sure.
And so when we broke up, so we were, of course, it was like I said, it was always, we were just sad all the time. It was just sadness, sorrow, depression. There was not a lot of happiness. It was just going through the motions. What?
Yeah.
Something to say?
No, I know this is your episode. I mean, I think we definitely had some happy moments. Like, I wouldn't say we were like miserable all the time. But see, this is so interesting. This is why I wanted to bring you on, because this is,
I mean, it wasn't like misery all the time. We're sitting there just in misery, but
we had some nice nights. I mean,
but even the nice times, in the back of your head, there's that gnawing sadness there, that gnawing sensation of just reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was all ever present. It
Yeah.
was just it's there
Yeah.
always. And I mean, still you get pangs of that, of course.
Mhm.
But at the time, it was, yeah, we had a good meal, but your dad is, in the hospital. And like it's just like, oh yeah, forgot about that, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it changed you 100% and it changed me 100%. Like we both changed people over that.
Could we dig into that?
Well, yeah,
Like
I
what
mean,
would you say about that? How do you feel? I want to focus on you for a second. How do you feel it changed you? Like either in the moment, long term, I guess, but however you want to approach it. But
well, yeah, so I the way it changed me was I am now more equipped to deal with something like that,
mm-hmm.
and I know,
In what ways?
well, just emotionally more equipped.
Okay. So that's yeah, because one of the things I wanted to ask you is like kind of what you would have done differently or what you would have done the same. I mean, it could go either way. But like I guess in addition to that, is there anything that you would have done differently, like knowing what you know now?
I might have talked to you about it more.
Mm.
We didn't really talk about it too much. I remember that.
One of the things I remember thinking is like he's not ask you didn't ask a lot either. Which,
Right.
by the way, which I'm not knocking you for actually. Well, maybe a little bit, but I think that's so common. Like people don't necessarily want to ask somebody who's going through a difficult time or grieving or going through anticipatory grief, which is really what that
Especially for
was.
me, which had never gone through it. Like, what am I
Yeah,
gonna say? "Oh, I know how you're feeling." No, I don't know how you're feeling. Like,
right.
what could I possibly say to make this situation better? I couldn't say anything, so the best thing that I thought I could do was just
Not say
not
anything at
say a
all.
thing at all
And
and
that's
just
that's a slippery slope because that's and to see this is like why I love this conversation. This is why I wanted to do this because as I keep saying like griever versus non-griever. There's no griever or non-griever thing really, but like as someone who was in it and whose parents were dying and all the things, in my mind, I'm kind of like, why isn't he asking me more about it? Now, granted, I do know that yeah, you're kind of the type to like you're not as nearly as emotional as me, and it's not something that comes super naturally. But it is tricky, I think, when you are dealing with somebody who is going through something. Not that you weren't kind of going through it yourself. Of course, you're mourning my parents in his own way too, which I think is worth noting. And you actually very bluntly told me that once. You know, yeah, I miss them too. I I'm mourning them as well. Like obviously cannot compare, not to compare at all, but just, it was a very humble reminder like, oh yeah, this loss is affecting more than just me. But I think you also what I wanted to touch on, which I think is so important, is a lot of people will opt not to say something because you don't want to trigger or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this how you felt? Like you didn't maybe want to trigger me or you didn't want to make me sad or because I had just had a long day or because I
it's
was just
hard, yeah, it's hard to
like, how did you
know.
feel?
You don't know, like, I can't read your mind.
Yeah.
So, like, I can't sit here and be like, "Oh, she probably wants to talk about this really sad subject." Like,
Yeah.
I don't you don't think about that, and so, um
Is something what would you have done would you have just asked like,
yeah, I
"Hey,
would
do
ask, "Hey,
do
you
you
wanna
wanna
talk
talk?"
about it?"
Yeah, I truly I think if there's, like, any lesson to be learned here, it's just to ask, and you don't have to over ask, but just checking in, because I think so many people that are journeying through grief will say it's better to ask, it's better to maybe, like, fumble over your words a little bit than to just brush it under the rug and not say anything,
Right.
for sure.
I would've said I would ask if you wanted to talk about it, and I think another thing I could have done is ask you to talk about if you wanted to, and if you did,
Mhm.
just to listen.
Yeah.
I know that we all have a tendency to try and fix problems. Like, "Oh, you need to," well, just think of it like this, stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
you don't it's not something that you're trying to fix because you can't. It's something you're just listening. So, listen when you can and provide feedback if that's desired, but usually it's
Mhm.
just listening,
Yeah. And
which
just
I would have done more of,
yeah.
for sure.
Well, you are a great listener. I'll give you that. There are some times where, yeah, it's tough, and I think this is maybe some. I don't know, just guys and girls might differ on this sometimes. Where sometimes I'm kind of like he's sort of just listening. My dad actually did this too, and they don't give you much back, and you're like, excuse me, where's my feedback?
Yeah,
Can
just
I
listening.
get a little something? And they're like, oh, you wanted me to say something? I'm like, yes. Like it's just, I think our communication definitely suffered. Um, I don't know. I kind of felt like it did. There's distance. I think that's ultimately what it was. And that's where the biggest disconnection came, because I sounds so kind of sad now, but like I still saw myself marrying you. But ultimately, not to divulge any details of our breakup chat, but at the end of the day, you kind of just, you didn't see me as um someone you saw yourself marrying, or like you didn't,
Well, and
or maybe that's what was said, but
yeah, well,
maybe you were
so I
working
think
through
the
things.
the thing was with that is that uh you were a changed person.
Mm.
I was a changed person. I think
Well said.
I was getting used to the new you.
Mm.
And so it was
I love
something
that you just said that.
it was something for me that I had to uh
Yeah,
just
like grapple with, kind of
yeah, something I just had to
like process.
yeah, process. Like things the way they were will never be in the future,
Ooh,
if that makes sense.
that's deep.
Everything has changed and you can't go back
Yeah.
to the way it was.
Hmm.
And so that was definitely, and it's not fair, of course. Um, but the way that we were, the way our relationship was changed forever.
Yeah.
And so that was, I guess, probably having to process that and get over that um, was I would imagine in my head a huge part of it. And I mean, it was more subconsciously. It wasn't like this is a conscious thing that's happening. It's
Hmm.
reacting to a situation, and now looking back on it, this is why I reacted the way I reacted to it.
Interesting.
Um, because one, I didn't know how to deal with it. So obviously, if something changes and you don't know how to deal with it, you just jump ship. Like don't want to deal with that.
Well,
Uh,
but that's not everybody. That's how, to be fair, that's how you reacted to it.
I know, but I feel like that's a very common way to deal with problems,
For many people out there, sure.
sadness, anguish, emotions. You know, just
Like you just
like
want to get away
get
from
away
it.
from
Like,
that. I don't
I don't
need
want
this.
to.
I don't want this in my
Well, we don't
life. I
want
don't
to
want to deal
hurt.
with that. Yeah.
Humans by nature, we don't want to feel pain, right? Like we don't want to hurt. We don't. Yeah, because it fucking sucks and it hurts. So
Yeah.
like, why would we want to like put ourselves right? Yeah.
And so when I know there's a very like infamous saying that I had where it was like, I don't see you as my person. When I said that, when I said, I don't see you as my person, going back to you had changed, I had changed, it was more of, I want things to be the way they were. I
Mm,
don't want the things the way they are now.
okay, I'm so glad you said, like, I was gonna ask you that. Like, in what way did you feel like both of us changed? Is there
I'm,
any more you can elaborate on that, or is like
I
that kind of the
mean,
gist of it? You just were like really unsettled with like where things now, and you weren't sure it was gonna get better.
yes, I mean, you were a different person after all of that. How could you not
Yeah,
be?
like is there
But
anything you can
it's hard to
pinpoint?
pinpoint things that
Okay.
it's just you as a whole, you as a person
Hmm.
were changed, which is completely understandable. And I mean, I don't blame you for that. Like, how could you go through something like that and not be
Yeah,
changed?
you don't come out
You
of
have
that
to
the
be changed.
same way,
And so I feel like
unscathed.
that was me saying, like, I saw, I wanted or I was it was just like the old you that I was
You're
like
like kind of
wanting.
mourning too,
Yeah,
honestly.
I was mourning the loss of your old self. And like I didn't know
Oh,
how to deal with that. Um
that's deep, sweetie.
uh, but
I never get him this deep. This is
yeah, and I
amazing.
handled it the best way I could at the time. But of course, you know, after all of that happened, we broke up, we had a break. How long were we apart?
I don't know. I was gonna ask you. I feel like it was about a
Wasn't
month
that
and a
Yeah, it
half.
wasn't that long.
No, it actually
But
wasn't, because
and
by the time, just to put this in context, like I honestly can't remember the day we broke up. I think it was sometime in May. But and the reason I remember it's by July 13th, by the day that my dad died, we were in contact again because I remember
Yeah.
it's ironically his dad's birthday. And I remember texting you. We were at least on texting terms. You had
Yeah.
already come over. We had had a conversation. Not going to get into all that, but um, yeah. And I was like, hey, I honestly don't remember what I said to you. I probably was just like, hey, FYI, dad died. And you're actually very sweet. I remember you saying like, okay, yeah, like I'd love to come see you, or I'll come over. We're having a thing for my dad's birthday, but like, I don't know. I think you were trying to be like, I'll come over right after work, or I'll come over after that, or something. I was like, it's fine. Just don't bother. It's like I don't fucking care about anything anymore. And I don't know. I think after that we started talking, and then again, could be like part two of the conversation of everything that happened after that. Um,
But yeah, I
yeah, just
mean,
understanding what led
once
up to that.
yeah, I mean, once that happened, and then, living life after is when I definitely was like, "Oh,
I kind of get it now.
yeah," and
Well,
I,
maybe not get it, but you can.
had a minute to kind of process it and think about it and mull it over and just really react to what everything that had transpired over the, years.
Yeah.
Um,
I think there's a lot of shock for both of us.
and then
I would say,
figure,
I don't know.
you figure out that, you do love the person, and um, you still want to be with them. And so going through what we went through, it's definitely bonded us
Mhm.
in ways that a lot of couples are not bonded. And I felt just that we probably we just are great together, and I think that it definitely
Mhm.
definitely um, want to be with her and wanted to be with her, and I was
Did
just
you like not know how or something? Like
yeah, I
kind of.
just didn't know how to. It just ill-equipped emotionally for things.
Mm.
And so after everything it was said and done and we started talking again, you realize that you can't not be with someone,
Mhm.
right? That makes sense. Yeah.
Sure.
I realized that I can't not be with her. And so luckily you were available and you were able to we got to talking again and kind of went from there. But it was just
It was a process. I mean, it took a lot of unpacking. There's a lot of things that both of us had to unpack about ourselves, about what had happened. I had a lot of grieving to do. I think you had some grieving to do. I mean, of my parents, sure, but
of
I think
course
of just life before, so to speak,
grieving,
pre
reacting,
pre.
thinking about, just it was a lot.
Yeah.
And I think the time, away was useful.
Mhm.
That month or month and a half or whatever it was, I think was useful.
It was even more than, yeah, I will say it was probably even more than that when all was said and done, as far as like, because we did not really jump back into it. Like I definitely remember
right,
thinking
it was
like,
slow.
okay, this was like, because some of the things that were said was like not like like mean or anything. It was just I was just like those are very impactful things to say to a person. So I can't just like I've been through enough, right? Like, and I was in therapy at this point when we were kind of getting back together. So I was working through a lot of things. I mean, just finally, I think we were both getting like the help and the reflection that we needed.
Yeah.
And we did that a little bit apart. We came back and did that together
Yeah.
in a lot of ways and have just kind of continued
Mm-hmm.
doing it from there. All right. So, want to start closing this out here a little bit. I think definitely more to come. At least one more episode, possibly two.
Oh,
We'll see if everyone likes you. I may or may not bring you back.
fair.
But what I want to ask and kind of closing this out is what advice or guidance or words of wisdom or whatever would you give to somebody who was or is like in your shoes in terms of witnessing someone going through some hardship or adversity, and whether it's the loss of a person or like the death of a loved one or whatever, that because there's lots of types of loss out there. um what advice would you give them in terms of how to best be there for someone who is going through a really traumatic time?
I would basically just tell them to uh, just communicate and, make sure that you ask
Mhm,
the person that's going through the tragedy or the grief,
mhm.
ask if they want to talk about it, ask if they need something. Um, a lot of times when people are going through that sort of thing, they're very closed up and they don't
Yeah,
express a lot of things. So,
great point.
if you ask, it gives them an opportunity to, you know, uh, communicate with you of whatever they need to communicate at that time.
Mhm.
So I would just say definitely communicate. And I would say that it's just know that it's okay to not know what to do.
Oh, well said, babe.
It's
That's really beautiful. No, for
yeah.
real. That's great advice. Well, okay, finish your thought, and then I have a question.
No, it's okay that you don't know how to deal with it. It's okay that you don't know how to help someone that's going through something like that because we're not born with the innate ability to know how to handle that. We're not we that's definitely a learned you learn how to deal with that, which some people learn faster than others.
Mhm.
But just take solace in the fact that not everyone knows how to deal with it. You're not the only one. I'm certainly had no clue what I was doing or how to help you out at any point. I didn't know what to do. And it's helpful to know that it's not just me.
Yeah. You're not alone.
Yeah,
It's true. I mean, grievers aren't alone. We're not alone in our grief, certainly. I hear me say it all the time. But I think that's beautiful advice and words of wisdom for people that are feel really helpless. I think helpless is often, I'm not going to put that word in your mouth, but I think
yeah,
a lot of people that are trying to support desperately, trying to support somebody who's going through something difficult, they just feel very helpless. I feel like they're kind of like you never catch a break or say the right thing or do the right thing. And I don't know if that's how you felt,
totally.
but I probably did not make that easy on you. I remember being snappier than usual. Like I remember not feeling like myself. And without going into like a ton more detail here, just for the sake of time, like yeah, I definitely wasn't myself. And I know it's like I don't know how helpful we've been in this conversation as far as being able to like exactly pinpoint things, but I mean, so much of it is a blur too. Like, and you come out of it, and of course, hindsight is 2020. But I think that's beautiful advice. Just giving yourself grace on both ends of um, being the person grieving, being the person who's trying to support. Is there any again, maybe advice isn't the right word, or actually, let me word it this way: would you have done anything differently to help yourself feel like you could support me more? Like, I think you even told me once, like, you had were reading some articles or something. Am I making this up?
Yeah,
Where you know what I mean? Where you
sure.
were trying to, like, figure out ways or research or, whatever
Yeah, I
on,
was
like,
reading
how to
how to
help.
help someone that's grieving,
Yeah.
which
Which is hard because and here's another, like, principle of grief, everyone grieves differently. So I think it's just more goes to your point of, like, you just kinda have to ask. You just have to show up. You just have to be there. Just try, like, you know? Everyone has to get out of their comfort zone a little bit, and especially as somebody perhaps like you who doesn't wear their emotions on their sleeve. It's really just the effort, I think, that goes a long way. And to be fair, to play devil's advocate, like, as someone who's grieving, like, you might not see what someone's trying to do for you. You might not I certainly didn't. I didn't always appreciate him the way that I could have. That was a big learning lesson for me. And a lot of people in my life who have seen grief or have lost a parent or whatever are like, Tara, don't beat yourself up for that. Like, he needed to support you and he needed to do this and that. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, that's true. Um, do we get a complete hall pass in life though to go around and treat people like crap and be snappy and whatever. No, not really. But sometimes in the throes of grief, you kind of you don't even like recognize yourself. You don't even know how to function, how to get up every day, how to, my God, do anything. So I think that's beautiful advice from both a relationship perspective, but also, as a friend, as a friendship thing.
Sure.
Because at the base of every great relationship is a friendship.
Yeah.
So that all being said, I think that wraps it up for now. Thank you for being vulnerable.
No, you're welcome. Until next time.
Until next time. And there will definitely be a next time for sure. Like I said, this journey of loss and grief for both of us, although it showed up very differently, of course, and we both had different relationships with this loss and our grief, certainly, had a big impact on both of us, individually and as a couple, but there's definitely more to unpack. And thank you for being a willing participant. Yeah, I love you and I appreciate you.
Love you too.
Thanks, sweetie.